this activity, you will need an oatmeal box, a flashlight, lightweight cardboard, black paint, scissors, push pin, and a pencil, as well as a star chart, which we have put in the description box in the link below. So first things first, you're going to take your lightweight cardboard and your lid and trace some circles of the lid. Then you're going to cut them out and go ahead and make sure that they fit inside the lid of your oatmeal box. So once you know that they fit, go ahead and make a few more circles, however many is up to you. So then you're going to take some black paint and paint those black. So while those are drying, you can now paint the outside of your oatmeal container black as well if you want. This is not required, but it's kind of fun. I created a galaxy on the outside of mine, which you can do by using all different types of colors, sponge, brushes. It's up to you. You just create your galaxy however you want it. The last step that I'm doing is creating stars on the outside of mine, and I'm using that with white paint and an old toothbrush and just flicking it all around the outside, creating this really cool cosmic galaxy. So once you're done with that, you can go ahead and set it aside to dry. So once it has dried, you need to cut a hole for the flashlight. So I took my flashlight, measured how big it was going to be, and then took an X-Acto knife and cut around it. You can also use scissors or get your adult to do this step. Just whenever we're dealing with something sharp, make sure to be careful. So next I'm going to create my constellations. So I did some research and picked 4 constellations that I liked, drew them out, and then took a white paint pen and marked out where the stars are. I made sure to write the name of the constellation on there as well, just so that I know which one is which. So next you're going to take a push pin, and wherever those star points are, you're going to push a hole through. So after you are done with that, you can go ahead and put it in the lid, and it's time to test it out. So you will obviously need a dark room for this. So I found a dark room and went ahead and turned it on, and you can see Orion there. There it is. Looks awesome. Hope you enjoy.
Hi everybody, my name is Chrissy and I'm with the Chattanooga Public Library, and today we have a very special guest with us. So special guest, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Jamie Britz. I am a proposal manager and engineer at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland.
What do you do there?
So what I do right now actually is I help scientists write proposals to get NASA headquarters to fund their mission, to do the science that they want to do. In the past, I used to be a mechanical engineer and a systems engineer. You know, I help design missions, and now I've shifted to where I help scientists develop ideas for their missions.
I would love for you to tell everybody like how you got into the position that you are. Like,
okay.
What did you study? How long have you wanted to work for NASA? Was it like, whoops, just got the job?
No, actually for me, so when I was growing up, I had a lot of relatives in Huntsville, Alabama, which is where there is a space center, Marshall Space Flight Center, and they have a really big like visitor center museum, you know, with like a big rocket park. They've got a full-size Saturn V, well, I mean, a real Saturn V, which is the rocket that took astronauts to the moon. And I used to go there, you know, a couple of times, you know, once every year or two, I would go back to that museum and loved it. And I think that really sort of set me on the path. And then while I was growing up, like the Voyager spacecraft started sending back pictures of the planets, and the space shuttle got built. And I just kind of wanted to work for NASA, you know, from a very young age. And so I did kind of set my sights on it and try to make decisions to get there. I in high school, I took challenging math and science courses because I wanted to try to get into a good engineering school. I picked a college that had a reputation for being a good engineering school. I couldn't afford to go to one of the super schools like MIT or Caltech, but I went to Virginia Tech, which has a good engineering program.
Great school.
Um, I majored in aerospace engineering, and then while I was going to college, I actually got involved in the co-op program where I would work a semester at a NASA center, and then I would come back and do another semester of school. And so I did that, took an extra year to graduate from college, but then that got my foot in the door at NASA. And when I graduated, I went to work there. I've spent my whole career in NASA. Out of school, I went to NASA, and I started at a different center, and then I transferred to Goddard after a few years. And so once I was at Goddard, I kind of, spent some time working like one job here and then trying out another job here, then working my way up until I found the things that I really enjoyed doing there.
Awesome. So, what kind of missions have you helped with in the past?
So Goddard has a couple of areas of specialty. All of the missions that Goddard does are what they call robotic space missions. So there's no people on the spaceships. They're just robots, satellites, and probes. And Goddard, they do space science, which is like telescopes that look deep into space. They do Earth science missions, which are usually satellites that orbit the Earth and monitor the climate or the water cycle, things like that. And they also do solar and planetary science, where they investigate different planets or look at the sun and understand how it works.
What has been like the craziest thing that you have worked on or experienced during your long tenure there?
So one of my favorite things that I've worked on was when I was a mechanical engineer. I was part of a team that designed and built um, a laser altimeter instrument, which is essentially it wasn't that big, but it was very impressive. It was able to shoot a laser and time how long it takes to hit something and come back, and then it can measure how far away that thing is. And that instrument was part of a spacecraft that went to Mercury. And that spacecraft orbited Mercury, and the laser altimeter mapped the surface, like the topography of Mercury for the first time, and sent it, back to the scientists at Goddard. So yeah, so I helped build a space laser that went to Mercury.
Mind blown. Mind blown. That is so cool. Oh,
And the other thing I like to think about, even though it's kind of sad but also cool, like that mission ran its course, and then at the end of the mission, the spacecraft was allowed to crash into the surface of Mercury. So I built something that's on Mercury, which is kind of cool.
that's really cool. Can you just kind of give us some basic ideas of what you or the scientists that you've worked with have discovered?
So one thing to point out is that the star that we know the most about is actually the sun. The sun is a star, and so a lot of what we know about stars in general we can learn by looking at the sun. But then there are lots of different types of stars, like they come in different sizes and different colors to a certain, which like has to do with what's going on inside them. Um, and there are some stars that are pretty far away. There are some stars that are super far away, and then there's actually entire galaxies full of other stars that are really, really far away. One of the things I think is most fascinating about looking at stars that are far away is that it takes time for the light to travel from a star to where we are. And so if a star is like a million light years away, what we see is actually what that star looked like a million years ago, because that's how long it took the light to get to us. So when you look really far away, you're actually kind of looking back in time at that part of the universe.
Oh, that's messing with my brain. It's messing with my brain. But that's really interesting. And it's I feel like that would probably make it really hard to study those types of things because it's the things that are happening in the past, correct?
Right, right. But the universe itself is really old, and new stars get born on a relatively regular basis. So even when you're looking far away, sometimes not all the stars are super duper old.
One of my questions was, are stars born? And if so, how does that happen?
Right. So, I mean, a lot of the stars in the universe were kind of formed, early in the evolution of the universe. Like first there's, I'm probably simplifying, but there was like a bunch of gas in the universe that um, most of it formed into stars, but some of it didn't, and some of it kind of stayed clouds of gas. And that there are still those clouds of gas out there, and periodically stars get born out of those clouds of gas. And then I think sometimes you can even have stars that will like go supernova and they blow all of their stuff out into space. And then I think sometimes new stars can form out of all of that stuff.
So new
Uh,
stars can be born from basically like the death of another star.
right.
So,
I think so. I would have to get the scientist's opinion on that. But generally, yeah, there are ways that stars get born, although they're not necessarily being born as rapidly as stars are dying. There's lots of stars out there, and there's some pockets where new stars are being born.
but for the most part, it's the sad side of,
Yeah.
on average, how long it takes a star to die. I really hate that terminology. It just sounds so
Yeah.
sad. Like, but
I I actually am not that sure. I believe it's on the order of billions of years usually. Um, and another thing, like when a star um, stops operating as a star, if we don't want to say that it dies, um, there are different ways. There are different things that can happen to a star depending on how big of a star it is when it reaches the end of its life, and maybe a few other factors. But sometimes they will collapse and explode, and that's like a nova or a supernova. Sometimes they will collapse so tightly that they become a black hole, and that's how black holes are formed. And then sometimes they just kind of collapse into like a just a little, they call them dwarf stars, like a white dwarf or a red dwarf, that don't really burn like stars like they used to, and just kind of stay that way. I do know one interesting thing is that you know stars, some stars, they're kind of like element generators. Like they take the hydrogen, and like as they do their process of shining, they're combining these things into heavier and heavier elements. And then when stars go nova or supernova, they'll blow these elements out into the universe. And in some cases, there are elements on Earth that probably originated in the hearts of stars that were blown out and eventually came here.
that is really cool. What about shooting stars?
So shooting stars are not actually stars. Um, they are meteorites that are entering the Earth's atmosphere, and then as they fall through the atmosphere, um, as they're ramming into the particles of air in the atmosphere, they heat up and essentially kind of catch fire is not quite the right term, but they burn up and they burn bright as they do that, and that's what a shooting star is.
I am very interested in the stories and the history, mythology behind constellations. And
Okay.
I would love to hear the opinion of somebody that works at NASA about these stories that have been used in all different cultures. Is that something that NASA thinks of as like pish posh, or is that kind of a interesting folklore that goes along with the science?
No, I mean, I would definitely say it's not pish posh. I mean, the stories that people have created when they look up at the stars. I mean, to a certain extent, the first time people looked up and started trying to figure out what stars are, that's kind of the first science. That's the first space science, you know? I mean, a lot of people in, you know, the science and I think also engineering fields, you know, they get their start in that direction sometimes when they're little kids and they're just learning about some of these stories, you know, the things that maybe aren't exactly true but are fascinating. And it's the same kind of thing that happens when you're a kid and you look up at the stars and you try to you want to know what it is, and you see other people thought, oh, it was a horse, or it was, you know, a hero who, you know, went to the stars after they were, you know, after they lived. One thing that comes to mind thinking about constellations, you know, when we think about constellations, and certainly the people who came up with them, you know, kind of picture them as sort of like, you know, these points that are all kind of on the same sort of plane. You know, I think the Greeks thought they were like on a crystal sphere or something. Um, but in reality, a lot of these constellations, like the stars aren't close to each other at all. Like some of them will be 1 million light years away and some of them will be 5 million light years away. And sometimes one piece that looks like a star is actually like, you know, a galaxy that's super far away and just shows up kind of like a star. And so I think it's kind of fun to learn about what the individual points in the constellation are, because sometimes that's pretty fascinating.
Is there anything else that you can think of that kids, teens, adults, anybody might want to hear from somebody that works at NASA? No pressure.
No pressure. I think I might just say, I think that, you know, the scientific research that NASA does is valuable. You know, I mean, it's expensive, and there's always, you know, a question of how do you spend precious resources when there are a lot of problems to deal with. I just think that discovering these things, learning about how the universe works, helps to inform us about sort of who we are and how our own, you know, planet works. And even just the endeavor of trying to learn these things is valuable to society. And, you know, I just want to give it a plug, you know. Absolutely. Go science.
Go science. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to us and give us some really fun information.